Hey DCC, and welcome to another edition of Morning Coffee. Well, I don't know if you know anything about sheep, but I don't. But when I worked out in Montana, I worked on a ranch. We had a Charolais Angus mix. Our bulls were Charolais, and you know, each year after we went through branding season, we'd start flooding all the plains, and the pastures furthest away from the ranch. And we would divert water and kind of flood the plains, green it up, and then we would drive the cattle way out there. And then as the year went, you'd kind of keep driving the cattle back towards the ranch, so that when winter hit, they were closest to the ranch, and so they would kind of eat through all the greenery, and we would just keep moving them from pasture to pasture. One of the things that you'll learn if you ever have to drive cattle is that they are some of the most obstinate, dumb animals that you have ever seen in your life. And so we'd, probably have 8 to 10 people driving cattle, and we'd all be on horseback. But we had blue heelers as dogs, and we would start driving them. But as you drive them, you kind of, you're going back and forth. But just as soon as you start going right, the ones that you just pushed over here, they're all starting to turn around and come back the direction. They never get it that you're like, hey, go this way, right? They're constantly turning back around. They want to go the opposite direction. You constantly have to go back and forth and back and forth. And hopefully with blue heelers, you get those dogs barking, and they kind of can, prevent them a little bit from turning too much. And so hopefully it doesn't take so long to drive them. But it is really frustrating, especially when you first start out, because you're just not used to something just taking that long, and animals that just don't get it. And so it was super, super frustrating. And I think that's probably how sheep are to some degree. But Jesus uses this illustration of sheep in John 10, right? And he says, I think in around verse 27, he says, my sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. And so there's this quality that Jesus wants to establish, and that is that these sheep had a shepherd, and when they heard the shepherd's voice, they recognized him. And so there was a certain relationship that the sheep had with the shepherd, and they would kind of listen, and they'd follow, and they'd know his voice versus somebody else's voice, and there was a recognition there. Jesus calls us sheep and says, hey, if you're going to qualify as a sheep of mine, then you're going to know my voice, you're going to hear it, and you're going to follow it. Now, in the Greek, it's interesting, and I don't want to get too technical, but hearing and following, those are what we call present active indicative, which means they're an ongoing action. In other words, I can't say, hey, way back when I made a decision to follow Jesus, and so at that moment, I became a sheep. And now, because Jesus has got me, I don't have to try. I don't have to do anything. I'm kind of just, I'm saved. And that's it. That's done. It's done. But the problem is that that's not what Jesus is saying here. He's actually saying that there's this continuation, right? That in order to be a sheep and to qualify, you have to keep hearing the voice of Jesus, and you have to keep following the voice of Jesus. So I want to read why that's important, because in Hebrews 27 it says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. But let's pick up in verse 28 of John 10. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. But let's go back to verse 27, right? Because the idea is that God is our protector, and our souls and our salvation and everything are safely within the Father's hand, and nobody can attack the Father and change that status. But in verse 27, there is somebody who can change the status. And that is if you stop being a sheep, right? If you aren't going to continue to strive after hearing Jesus and following him, then you aren't that sheep who's in the hand of the Father, right? So there's this idea, this concept, that there's this life that can't be lived on pause, right? You can't be stuck in neutral. It doesn't mean you're supposed to live out perfectly. It doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. It doesn't even mean that there's going to be, time periods where you struggle with sin for a long period of time. But there has to be a true commitment of your heart that you're going to strive to hear Jesus and to follow him. And that has to be a continuance, something that you're striving for and continuing to do. We hear Paul saying that, I run the race and I run it with full endurance and I run hard, so that at the end of the day, I can win the prize that this upward call of God. And Paul is saying that otherwise I could forfeit it. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. So he's talking about running this race of faith and being committed all the way through, right? And so that's one of the things that we always want to think about. And in 2018, as you heard, Greg saying not too long ago in one of his sermons, right? Our focus in 2018 is to come alongside you and help you and encourage you. But we really want you to understand that there's an effort that has to be made on your part, right? You need to strive to follow, to hear God and to follow him. And so that can come in a lot of different ways, right? But it isn't just, I show up on Sunday, I hear a sermon, I go home, and then I just kind of live my life the way I want to live it. And then I just come back on Sunday or Saturday and listen to another sermon, have a little bit of worship, and then I go back and live my life the way that I want it. That's not hearing and following, right? There has to be a commitment that it's not just hearing, Greg preach or some other person preach on the weekends. There has to be a place where you're striving to have this relationship with him, study the Bible, and get involved and get in community and surround yourself with other people that are like-minded and who are Christians and that can encourage you. And you need mentors in your life. But you also need to be growing and maturing, because Paul makes it very abundantly clear that one of our missions is that we need to reach and help rescue other people, right? And I rescue them not by bringing them to church. I rescue them because I can tell this story of the faith that is within me, that I can tell them my story, that I can share with them what I've gone through and why I love Jesus and why I'm committed to him, and that person can hear it and benefit from it. And so there's this active participation that is needed in the church, right? And so those are the things that we want to do. So remember the 3 circles that Greg talked about last year in 2017. There's this idea of discovering your story. There's an idea that we all have things in our past that can wound us and affect our present. And so we need to discover our story. We need to discover what those wounds are. And we need to work on letting Jesus heal those wounds. But then there's a movement from, you discover your story, and that needs to be something that's an ongoing process, right? It doesn't begin and end, after you go through one Wild at Heart, right? You keep going back and you'll discover more and more and more things about your story. And so that process never ends, right? This isn't linear. This isn't, I discover my story, check. And now I'm going to move to the next circle, which is experience Jesus, check. And then move to live on mission. These are things that we remember, if you remember when Greg spoke on it, that we're called to live in the tension of all 3 of those circles. Discover our story, experience Jesus, and live on mission, right? Some of us want to stay in story, right? Some of us have gone through Wild at Heart 8 times. And we just keep going back. I love that part, just keep going. And I'm not saying that's wrong unless that's all you're doing, right? But we need you to experience Jesus. And that can come through worshiping him. That can come through a prayer life and really praying and listening and hearing God and talking with God. And then there's this pursuit of understanding the Bible more and knowing Jesus and who he is and how he can enrich your life and allowing him to make an impact. And then hopefully we take both of those and we see that we're living on mission, right? And there's a temptation for us to stay in story or not do story at all. I don't want to talk about my past. I'm just going to live and experience Jesus. I'll memorize Bible verses and I'll do. That's not what experience Jesus is. But we'll kind of camp out in Bible knowledge or I'll study the Bible. I'll be in a Bible study. I'll just do that. And that's not good enough either, right? That's not okay. And then, some people are just like, I don't know anything about Jesus and I don't really want to sit in the living room and talk with people about my story and I don't really want to deal with my past. So just put me to service, right? And I'm just going to serve. I'm just going to get involved and you can throw anything at me. I'll push a mop. I'll clean a bathroom. I'll serve in kids' classes. You name it, I'll go out and do it. And while that's a great attitude, if you're not working on your story and you're not experiencing Jesus, you're not living in that tension of those three things, then it's not okay, right? And so this is what we want you to strive for in 2018, is to live in the tension of those three things. We want you actively going after your story. We want you working on getting to know more, more Jesus, more Jesus, more Jesus. And then we want you to live on mission, right? We want you to put that to action. We want you to get out there and put your faith to action and rescue people and help people and serve. And there's opportunities to serve within the church, and there's opportunities to serve with our ministry partners and in our community. There's opportunities for you to live on mission at your job, with your coworkers, with your family, with people that you come across, right? And so there's so many ways for you to be actively on mission, but we want you to live in the tension of those three and strive to do them all, right? And it's not easy. It's not easy for me. Busyness of life and temptation to do what's comfortable, temptation to not move into areas that I feel awkward or scared or ashamed, can keep me from doing any of those, right? But nevertheless, that's what I'm called to do. And so that's what we want you to understand. So think today how you can continue to strive to be in the middle of those three circles: discovering your story, experiencing Jesus, and living on mission. All right? Have a good day.